So California voters in elections. There are 25 million eligible voters. 19 million are registered, so that's a 75% registration, which when you compare that to other states, we really do have a system that wants everyone to participate. We have the motor voter law, which tries to get people to register when they get a driver's license or a state identification card. We're trying to make it as automatic as possible. In the past, historically, nationwide, voter registration laws have been used to disenfranchise people, obviously, to keep them away from the polls. And we have that problem in a number of states. A number of states are doing awful, terrible things to keep people away from the polls. That's really not a problem in California. And we'll talk a little bit about, voter fraud and voter identification. It's kind of hard to imagine when you're in California because we just don't face that struggle and we don't face that challenge. But other states do. So we'll look at that. When we look at party registration, 47% of those registered, the 19 million who are registered, 47% of them are members of the Democratic Party, 26% are Republican, and 27%, the fastest growing group, is no political party. Now, the reason that no political party is growing in size is because our elections favor that. If we had closed primaries that meant that you had to belong to a political party to participate in primary elections, that number would go way down. And in states that have closed primaries, almost no one is no political party affiliation. But our elections, our rules, really, there's no penalty to being no political party. So more and more people are kind of stepping away from the Republican Party and stepping away from the Democratic Party to join no political party affiliation. And that's kind of the real story of where the Republicans went. It used to be pretty even in registration, and it's not that the Democratic Party has grown to some massive proportion. It's that people have joined or resigned from political parties. Party registration by county, one of the items on the scavenger hunt is to find the counties with the highest party registration of Democratic Party or Republican Party, no political party. And we can sort of see that the darkest blue areas are in the Bay Area and the coastal regions. The darkest red are along the Inland Empire and in the more rural areas. When we look at who is likely to vote, it's the older you are, the more likely you are to vote, and it's a big predictor. It's not the only one. Age is not the only predictor of voting. The more educated you are, the more likely you are to vote. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote. The richer you are, the more likely you are to vote. The more established you are in the community or to vote. So homeowners vote more than renters. People with kids in school vote more often than people without kids. People who interact with the government vote more often than they don't. I mean, it all sort of comes down to this concept of efficacy, voter efficacy. If you as a voter believe that your vote will matter, that it'll make a difference, then you are more likely to vote. I mean, that sort of makes sense, right? Somebody wrote a dissertation on it and proved it. But it makes sense that if you believe your vote matters, if you believe that you make a difference, if you believe that your vote for a local official matters, you're more likely to research those people, you're more likely to know those people. It just makes sense. If, on the other hand, you are somebody who's not involved in politics, you don't know anyone who runs for office, you've never been to a school board meeting, you don't care what happens at the local schools. I mean, not that you don't care, but that you're not invested in it, that you're not a stakeholder, that your kids aren't in school. So, yes, you want great schools in the generality of that, but not specifically. If you own a home, you care more about, property values and making sure that the open field next to your house doesn't have a, adult bookstore or a strip club, because that would probably make the property values go down. So those kinds of things engage people and get them involved. If you believe the entire system is crooked and nothing you can do can make a difference, and also if you concentrate on national politics, where the differences are, just wildly disparate. Somebody wins by 3 million votes. Well, how can my vote possibly matter if it's 3 million vote difference? But if you're engaged in local politics and you see an election that, the difference between somebody winning or losing is 2 votes or 14 votes or 20 votes or 100 votes or 1,000 votes, all of a sudden your vote really does matter. So we know that older people are likely to vote. And then when you look at this, likely to vote by ethnicity, and you see that 72% are white, Latinos make up 14% of the electorate, blacks make up 6% of the electorate, Asians make up 5%, and others 3%. You could look at this and wrongly assume that that means that white people vote more often. Not necessarily. What happens is that old people vote and old people are white. And that matters because it's not a system of ethnicity driving the turnout. It's that old people are white. Look at this. 65 and older, 78% white. 18 to 24-year-olds, where 50% are Latino, has a low voter turnout, 24%. So very few of our diverse population age groups are voting, which leads to a chart that looks like this, where it looks like white people vote. But I do want to say that this chart matters. This chart means that the electorate, the people making decisions, are more white than the California politician, more wealthy than the California population, more educated than the California population, older than the California population. So if we really want to hear from everybody, we've got to engage more people who are not on this particular chart. Now, if you look at the June primary, you can see some interesting trends that are happening. Voter turnout is definitely down, only, 38% turnout, which is really high for a primary, but really sad overall. But that's high. And one of the reasons was because there were a lot of competitive elections in this June primary. So a lot of people were engaged in the process and had competitive races to turn out for. Lots of people, mailers and commercials and ads, lots of social media attention on this election. And so voter turnout was relatively high for a primary. Usually it's in the 20s, maybe hitting 30%. This is, pretty close to 40%. Overwhelmingly, people vote by mail, but we still have 32% of the folks who walk in on election day. The interesting thing is about half of the people who vote by mail actually walk in their ballot to a precinct on election day because they've forgotten to mail it in. So that takes a long time to count. If you mail in your ballot, I usually mail in my ballot about the time I get it because I've been studying the ballot for so long and I feel like, oh, it's finally here, October. So I mail in my ballot really early. They get it, they process it, they have it ready to go on election day. At 8 p.m. when the polls close, they count my ballot and it's done. At 8:30 when they release the first poll results in Orange County, I'm like, there's my ballot. For those procrastinators, my husband among them, who waits until the last minute and finally votes and walks in his ballot to the precinct or, mails it in the day before, it has to, then it takes a while because you have to verify it and you have to verify the signature. And that process takes a day or so. When, hundreds of thousands of ballots are coming in, it takes even longer. And so we now have a lot of mailed in ballots that are not getting counted until, a week after election day. Interestingly, few elections switch because of that. It turns out that the people who are walking in their ballots are voting pretty much the same as the people who are mailing them in early or voting on election day. So if you vote at the precinct, if you go and vote in person, that's your precinct ballot, that gets counted that night. At 8 o'clock when the polls close, your precinct captain closes up the electronic ballots and drives it into Santa Ana. They download that information. Any paper ballots or provisional ballots are then processed the next day. And so we usually have results 10, 11 o'clock at night on election night. And we kind of know, even though there are, in the state of California, millions of ballots that haven't been counted, very few election switch results when all the ballots are counted. But they are all counted eventually. So that's sometimes a notion that people get, that once the election is decided that night. That's just what the media is reporting. We don't actually certify the election until a month later. That's when the certification actually happens, that all the ballots have been counted and certified. So next we'll look at November, what happened, and see, turnout is obviously going to be much higher. We'll see if the vote by mail precinct is any different. And we'll see if the folks who come out to vote are different.